All right, let's get started, guys. Welcome back. Happy New Year to you all. Just a couple of things that we need to talk about to remind ourselves of. One is that we need to be reading Bob. So we have our first discussion on Bob Monday for you guys, Tuesday for B. But remember, you have 159 pages that you're supposed to read by Monday. Remember, that's why you got it before break. This was the guide. Okay. Yeah. Yep. So like a week from today. Okay. You will have all of class time Wednesday to read and prepare for your discussion. So the actual in-class day, Wednesday, I will be giving you the time. And a couple reasons for that, because I think you need the time, and two, because then I'm here to help you if you have any questions, okay? So remember, you were given this discussion guide. So this is what you have to prepare from your reading, right, to have some questions answered. You would use the book itself next Monday to talk from, to converse about some of the things, the topics that were going on from the book, from World War II. That is Monday, that's coming up. So if you don't have one of these, make sure you grab one or pick one up on your way out of class. You can access that on Canvas as well. So if you wanted to do it digitally, you can as well. It's basically, Monday's class is basically going to be kind of like a book club. Now, I'm sure none of you have ever been in a book club, but basically it's sitting down and talking about the book, what you're learning, what's happening, what's going on, what connections can you make, and we're just using this agenda to kind of spark the conversation or spur the conversation. So the important piece from today to next Monday is to actually read, right? I did talk about, we do have the audio version, like via YouTube, right? Each chapter is read out loud, so if that's going to be an option for you, then use that option, right? Otherwise, try to get into the book. So your homework for Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week is to be reading and preparing for that discussion Monday. Monday when you come into class, I'm going to get you into some small groups. We're going to have those conversations. Yeah.
All would it take you to get the whole book on audio?
I do not know.
Like 10 hours?
Maybe. I'd have to look at the. I don't know. I think less than. I would say less than that. No. The whole book. The whole book. Yeah, I'd say the whole book might be like between like 5 to 7.
Bro, the person who's reading
How many chapters are there?
You have your book?
No.
Oh, okay. But you can find that out. So here's the deal. For today, I'm going to basically be giving you an outline of kind of global conflict and resolution. So that's the theme that we started before break. So basically today I'm going to give you some background on a bunch of different conflicts in American history in the 20th century. I'm going to give you a handout. If you'd like to take notes, you can. We're going to do that for about 30 minutes or so, okay? And then the last part of class, I'm going to allow you to read a little bit before you leave, okay? So that's kind of class today. We're gonna give you some background of global conflict and resolution over the 20th century in U.S. history, just to kind of build some prior knowledge, some knowledge, and then it'll be prior knowledge. And then the end of class would be some reading time, and to making sure that you look at what you're responsible to know for the discussion, and just to continue reading in the book. When you come Wednesday again, just a reminder, we will use the books. We will be reading. If you want to plug in and do the audio version, that's no problem for me, okay? So, if you want to follow along on your device with the slides on the screen, I'll show you on Canvas where you can access those. And if anybody wants a hard copy to jot some information down, I do have some outline note, like a sheet for you if you want it. So raise your hand if you want one of these. Then I'll show you on Canvas and I do have a digital version of this right on Canvas too. So if you want to do that, you can. Otherwise, it might not be a bad idea to access the slides and have that in front of you. If you want. Anybody else? Did your hard copy? Okay. All right. So.
It can see it. It can see it.
All right. So where the slides are that we're going to be going over is where it says this conflict and resolution timeline. Looks like this. If you click into it, what you'll see is the note sheet and oh yeah, there it is. Okay. There's the actual slides, and if you click on this, you can access the note sheet. Okay. So I'm going to go through these with you. We'll talk about each one. I'm not going to try to spend a ton of time. This is just to give you some quick background and to kind of cover a couple themes about over the 20th century, why the United States was getting involved in these wars, these conflicts, okay, and what those briefly were like. I'm kind of going to be coming at it from the idea, these questions like, why do nations go to war? Why do we have war in general? And then how does foreign policy, nations, how they interact with each other, reflect some of the needs and priorities then of our country? So how does U.S. foreign policy, how do we interact with other countries, how does that really reflect some of our needs and priorities, and as they change, how does that deal with other countries, okay? So the first one, just prior to the 20th century, notice this would actually be the end of the 19th century, but it's important to talk about to kick this off today, is the Spanish-American War. So literally, right at the end of the 19th century, we have this war between the United States and Spain. Here's what it was about. Cuba, which is a tiny island off the coast of Florida, literally 90 miles away, was a Spanish territory. Okay, the Spanish controlled Cuba. And the U.S. had some American businesses in Cuba. There were some resources in Cuba American businesses craved, as well as the fact that we didn't really want a European power close to the United States, which Spain was. Okay? The Cuban people also asked the United States to help them get their independence from Spain. By the way, the United States was founded on independence, right? We got our independence from Great Britain. So the United States decided they would maybe do something about it, but they needed to have more of a reason than that. Like, for the government to kind of declare war on Spain, we needed some more reasons than that. Now, American journalists in the United States started writing some pretty bad things about the Spanish and what they were doing to the Cuban people. This was called yellow journalism. Basically, these exaggerated stories that kind of stretch the truth a little bit, like Spanish soldiers throw Cuban babies into the ocean. Like, really horrible things that they'd write about. Now, was there some shred of truth to what they wrote about? Sure, but they really exaggerated things. Bottom line is, this war starts when an American battleship that's anchored in Havana Harbor off of Cuba blows up. The USS Maine blows up. So we declare war on Spain. We fight Spain. We defeat Spain in 4 months. Very quick war. It's called the Splendid Little War. Basically what happens is, at the end of this war, we get a bunch of stuff. The United States does. We get territory. We get access to the Philippines. We get Puerto Rico. We get Guam. We help Cuba get their independence. And we have a naval base in Cuba called Guantanamo Bay. Anybody ever heard of Guantanamo Bay? A lot of times you hear it in the news and things like that. Guess what? The United States still have Guantanamo Bay? To this day? Yes, we do. So we do still have a naval base in Cuba as a result of this right here. But the biggest thing that happened as a result of the Spanish-American War, which is why we're starting with it, is the United States becomes a world power. We become the premier power in the world. Our military had arrived. We're this big bad new boy on the block. Our military looks like it's pretty legit. And so that is kind of what happens as a result of beating and defeating Spain in a war. Okay, so that's what we start with, because now we kind of have this reputation. Okay? By the way, if you have a reputation as a fighter, a lot of times you don't need to fight anymore. People just will back down to you. And that's kind of at first what will happen here. Okay? All right. My Cobra Kai fans up there. All right. World War I, called the Great War at first. This was going to be just a European war. The United States did not want to get involved. The United States was really trying to stay isolated. We didn't want to have to get involved in a war that was really not our business per se. So at first, from 1914 to 1917, the United States does not directly fight in World War I. What we do is we ship supplies, we sell weapons, we sell ammunition, we sell clothes, we sell food, but we don't get involved in the fighting of the war. Now, do we support some sides over the others, some countries over others? Yes, we do. We lean definitely more towards Great Britain and France, which is why when we do join the war in 1917, you see which side we're on. One of the reasons we joined this war is the Germans were sinking a lot of our supply ships, and we were kind of getting sick of it. Now the Germans did some other things that we won't go into all the details about, but bottom line is this was a horrific war. We had trench warfare, horrible fighting style. Weapons had advanced a lot, but the fighting style had not. We got machine guns, we have artillery, we have poison gas used. I mean, we had some nasty stuff. A lot of people die, a lot of people lose limbs. It's a disgustingly horrible war, a lot of devastation. In fact, in Europe, there's something called the Lost Generation. Literally, boys between the ages of 14 to basically 22 were almost like wiped out in Europe. Like, if you survived, you had some scars, either mental scars, like trauma, they called it shell shock, today we call it PTSD, or physical trauma, you had a missing arm, a missing leg, a missing eye. Like, it was a devastating event that happened. Now, the United States gets involved, but because it's at the very end of the conflict, we don't suffer very much. Plus, where is it located? It's located over in Europe. So, like, in the United States itself, nothing really is affected too much. In Europe, whole cities are destroyed, right? So, to rebuild that, right? So this is a devastating war. The U.S. gets involved at the end of it. We actually make pretty good money off of this war, right? Because we sell a lot of stuff to the European countries. And again, we step in at the end. One of the things that also comes about because of, oh shoot, I didn't know this got added in. Interesting. Okay, so the main causes, here's why we went into the war. Basically, military buildup. So militarism is just increasing military, right? So what happened was all these European countries, they kept having more soldiers and having more weapons. They had alliances. They said, okay, this country and I, we got each other's back. If one of the countries goes into war, we'll help, right? So in World War I, all these countries got sucked in at once. Imperialism, expanding and taking territory, okay? And then finally, nationalism, extreme pride in one's country, okay? And so all these things led to eventually a huge war called the Great War or World War I. I will say that there was a spark to this. There was an assassination that happened, but these things kind of led up to this explosive war in Europe. Okay. That's the same exact slide that was from before too, so I'll have to do some editing. Okay. The last thing I want to say, and there should be a slide about this, but I don't know what happened, but to end this war, we had something called the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? The Treaty of Versailles made it really, really bad on Germany. Like Germany had to take blame for the war. They never started it, by the way, but they had to take blame for starting the war. They had to pay all these war payments back that they couldn't afford. They had to like get rid of their army. There's all these horrible things that happened to Germany. So what happens next is we have a 20-year gap and then another war. Okay? We take a 20-year break, which basically the world economy goes in the crapper, aka the Great Depression, which by the way, didn't just affect the United States, it's actually worse in Germany. Okay? But we take a 20-year break, and then because of how terrible World War I ended for Germany and how they got all the blame and all this crap they had to do, well, Hitler comes to power, fascism kind of starts this type of, that the state is more important than the individual right or liberty, starts happening in Europe, in Italy, in Germany. So Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany. Well, eventually, Adolf Hitler starts going, well, we're going to build up our military. They weren't supposed to. We're going to start taking land back that we lost during World War I. They weren't supposed to. All these different things. Eventually, after he had taken too much land, Great Britain and France say, you got to stop, and they declared war. So World War II starts again, mostly in Europe. The difference this time is Japan is technically allied with these two European countries, Germany and Italy. And so there's going to be a Pacific part of the war as well. Now, the United States also does not enter this war right when it starts in 1939. You all know that the United States did not enter until we were attacked directly by the nation of Japan in 1941 at Pearl Harbor. That's how we entered the war. Now, just like in World War I, we had been supplying weapons, clothes, food, again to some of our allies that we weren't fighting with yet. But in 1941, that all changed when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. Now, obviously, you can see, and you guys have learned a lot about probably the Holocaust, things that Adolf Hitler was doing, rounding up different people groups and basically killing them, right? Murdering them. The Jews being the biggest group. This, at the time, then becomes the most devastating war in history. You can see some of the numbers and the graph here and the chart. Okay, the Soviets had it the worst. 11 million military deaths, 6.7 million civilian deaths. By far the largest numbers there. Horrific for the Soviets. Okay, they happen to be on the U.S.'s side in this war, right? And you can see the numbers. The United States is pretty low, actually. We didn't have as much, especially with civilians, 2,000. That's it. Because the war was not being fought in the United States of America. It was being fought in the Pacific and in Europe, and a little bit in Africa. If you notice, in World War I, 86% of the deaths of World War I were military, only 14% were civilian. That changes dramatically in World War II. And actually, it's crazy, 46% military, so the majority of deaths, 54% were civilians. So there's a couple reasons for that. One is we had the Holocaust, so a lot of people were rounded up and killed, of course. However, we also have a war strategy of targeting civilians and killing them during the war, okay, to try to get the other side to stop. We have fire bombings of different cities by the United States, in Japan, and in Germany. We have the Germans bombing around the clock, Great Britain, called the bombing, the Blitz, right? And then obviously we have 2 atomic bombs that we drop eventually on Japan. So we have civilian targets, we have a lot of civilian deaths. It's a very different type of fighting. There's a lot going on in World War II. Okay. Then we kind of focus into a really long conflict called the Cold War. There's actually no direct fighting between the U.S. and Soviet Union during the Cold War. They don't actually physically go to war in the fact that there's a battlefield and people are shooting and killing each other, but there's this idea between competition in the world between what the United States holds very important, the government being a democratic government, and the economy being this capitalist free market idea, compared to the Soviets, who have this communist government, where the government is in complete control, as well as in the economy, where the government tells you what you can produce, how to produce it, what you can sell it at. And so there's this competition between government, economy, but also in pretty much every aspect. There's this nuclear arms buildup, there's a space race, there's different wars around the world that the U.S. is involved in, that the Soviets also are involved in some way. We have spying, we have alliances, we have all these different things that happen during what's called the Cold War. You can see it. It's right after World War II. Okay, as soon as World War II ends in 1945, basically the Cold War competition, fight, war, whatever you want to call it, begins. And it does not end until about 1991. So pretty recently, actually, which is crazy, right? In my lifetime, Cold War ends, right? Not yours, unfortunately. You guys are pretty young. But this is a big deal, okay? We have basically Europe is split into two. Western Europe becomes democratic. Eastern Europe becomes communist. And there's problems between the two sides. And that happens then kind of throughout the whole world. We have little events that happen then during the Cold War that become big deals. One being the Berlin Airlift. Basically, the city of Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, just like Germany itself, was literally split into two. Okay? West Germany being kind of democratic, East Germany being communist. Berlin was the city that was actually in East Germany, which was a communist country then it became. So the capital city literally got split into two as well. What happened was the Soviets didn't like the Allied influence, the democratic influence of the other countries, France, Great Britain, and the United States. So they basically cut off all routes in and out of Berlin. They wouldn't allow people in, people out. A lot of people were trying to escape communist East Germany through Berlin, and then they'd fly out to either West Germany or some other place that was free. Well, the United States got involved. We said we can't go to war again. We can't fight and solve it that way. So what if we just send big cargo planes around the clock, and we literally just give supplies, we airdrop supplies to the people in Berlin that are completely cut off. We don't want to go to war with the Soviet Union right now, but we do want to help the people of Berlin who need it. Who don't have food, who don't have clothes, who don't have water. So what we did was, for a whole year, around the clock, we shipped and dropped supplies to the people of Berlin until finally the Soviets ended their blockade. So this was a big deal. This was like one of the first major showdowns between the U.S. and Soviet Union. Okay? Then we actually have another war. We have what's called the Korean War. Sometimes it's called the Forgotten War. And what we have here is when World War II ended, we literally have a country that's split into two. Korea is literally split into two. South Korea basically surrenders to the United States and becomes kind of where the United States helps set up a democratic government. North Korea actually surrenders to the Soviets, and they set up a communist government. And we literally have Korea, and we take it and it's split into two countries, North Korea and South Korea, right? By the way, still divided today. You probably learned about that in global studies. Okay? Bottom line is, when the U.S. finally took all its troops out of South Korea after we helped set up that country, North Korea invaded South Korea. And at the time, the United States did not want communism to spread, so we sent soldiers back to South Korea and said, we will help South Korea defend against the North Korean invasion. And eventually, we actually pushed them back into North Korea, and our soldiers want to keep going. Well, why don't we just liberate all of Korea? Let's push the North Koreans, let's push the communists into China. Well, that didn't work out so good. Bottom line is, after a couple years of fighting, we end up with a stalemate, and now we have the demilitarized zone, right? You guys kind of know maybe a little bit about that, where we literally have at the 38th parallel, like a border where there's 2 miles of nothing. There's, on either side, there's basically armed guards, and it's like, don't go across, and it's crazy stuff, right? There's literally no resolution from all the way back in the 1950s between North and South Korea. So we're just kind of stopped. It never officially ended, by the way, it just kind of, the fighting stopped. Okay, so bottom line is, does communism spread to South Korea? Nope, it doesn't, but really, a lot of Americans died fighting for South Korea's freedom. We also have something called the Geneva Accords. In 1956, we have some of the key players in the world meet. Some that are communist, some that are democratic, right? China and Soviets are communist. Great Britain, France, the United States are democratic. They talk about what happens in Korea. There's still no peace treaty, of course, we know that. But they also decided in their infinite wisdom, hey, we should do something about Vietnam. And now you're going, why the heck are they talking about this tiny little country in Southeast Asia? Well, here's the deal. France had actually Vietnam as a territory before World War II. During World War II, Japan occupied Vietnam. And when World War II was over, the Vietnamese wanted their independence. We don't want anyone occupying us anymore. It looked like they had a good claim to that. But France decided, no, we want to go back to Vietnam and continue to occupy it. We like Vietnam. They have rubber, they have tin, they have rice, they have things like oil, they have things that will help us. Well, the Vietnamese said, screw that, and kind of revolted and tried to get their independence from France. U.S., well, we should have supported Vietnam, but we decided to support our old ally, France. France was defeated, actually. The Vietnamese defeated the French. That's when the U.S. kind of stepped in. Well, in 1956, the idea was, well, let's just split. It worked out so well in Korea. I'm being kind of facetious there. Let's split Vietnam too. The northern part of Vietnam will become, the northern part will stay separate from the south, but eventually there could be free elections, and then the whole country could be unified and do what they want. Well, the problem was Ho Chi Minh, who was the kind of the leader in North Vietnam, was a communist. Okay, he kind of allied himself with the Soviets, and so the United States did not allow them to have free elections, which is weird because that goes against kind of our principles of free and open elections. And so we didn't even allow that to happen. Eventually, that's going to lead to what? Vietnam War, which, yeah, communism's going to, try to advance, right? Okay. Now, before we kind of get into full-scale war in Vietnam, we have 2 events that deal with Cuba again. Okay, Cuba had become communist under the leader Fidel Castro. Under President John F. Kennedy, we have 2 things that happen. Communists try to see how much they can get away with in Cuba. The United States said, you know what? Let's just take out Fidel Castro and make Cuba a democratic nation. Since it's literally 90 miles away from Florida, we don't want a communist nation so close to the United States. So the CIA convinced President Kennedy to try to kind of invade Cuba, but not with Americans, with exiled Cubans who we trained to try to go in. Well, it failed. It did not work out at all. It was a botched attempt. All these exiled Cubans got captured when they landed in Cuba, and the United States looked really bad because we tried to set it up. So the communists think, oh, Kennedy's weak, President Kennedy's weak. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start building missile sites in Cuba, nuclear missile sites in Cuba. And if active, these nuclear missile sites could hit basically all of the United States, any place in the United States except for like the far West Coast, maybe Los Angeles, but like, other than that, the range of these missiles could literally hit, these nukes would hit the United States. So, obviously that's not good. Okay, that's a problem if these missile sites become operational. So the United States has to figure out, how do we stop these missiles from becoming operational, but not have full-scale war, including possible nuclear war if we invade Cuba? Well, eventually we do a quarantine, and we try some other things, and we figure things out with the Soviets. I mean, it's pretty scary. There's like 13 days between when we find out that there's these missile sites being built in Cuba to finally kind of coming up with a resolution where they can like take the missile sites away, the missiles away, but it almost becomes full-scale nuclear war. In fact, it got so scary that at one point, really close to the end of this, President Kennedy sent all the White House staff home to be with their families because they thought, we're gonna have nuclear war. And I'd rather everybody go home and spend the last time on Earth with their families before we all die. Because we literally thought the Soviets would have to launch against us and we'd have to launch against them and basically wipe each other out. That sounds pretty fun, doesn't it? But for real, it was very close from that happening, which is crazy, right? Like, you would think like, no, level-headed people would never let that happen. Well, it almost happened. Now it doesn't, right? We're here, but isn't that crazy? That almost happened. Okay. Vietnam War, like I mentioned, I'm gonna go through these very quickly. I'm not gonna get into a lot of detail because I want to give you a little time to read before class is over. At least 15 minutes. So 5 more minutes of me talking. Okay. So here's what we happen. We do not allow elections. North Vietnam basically starts supporting communists in South Vietnam to basically have a rebellion against the South Vietnamese government. The United States supports the South Vietnamese government, which was not really democratic, but they weren't communist. Well, eventually, the United States sends more and more military over, at first as advisors and then as ground soldiers. We get in this messy, nasty war, mostly in South Vietnam, but we bomb the crap out of North Vietnam. Eventually, this is the first war that we officially don't win with our involvement. I guess people would say, well, technically we didn't lose, Mr. Hansen, because basically we just say we're done and we just take all our military home. And eventually, North Vietnam does invade South Vietnam, and Vietnam is one country today, and it was kind of a communist country for a long time. Okay? Complicated mess, very much more detailed and complicated than that, but I simplified it as best as I could for you. One of the key, celebrations and resolutions that the United States is able to bring about is under President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter brings together the nation of Egypt and the nation of Israel and gets them to have a peace treaty. Why is that a big deal? It's literally the first Arab nation ever to be at peace with Israel in literally infinity since the beginning of ever. Okay? Israel and Palestine, or Arab nations, have been at war since literally the beginning of time. And it goes back, it's complicated history, but you might have learned a little bit about that in global studies. So it's a big deal. First time ever, Israel and the Arab nation were at peace. And the United States helped bring that together. So that's a big, big deal. A big, big deal. Okay. We have something called Operation Desert Storm. Sometimes it's called the Persian Gulf War. The United States and a bunch of other countries actually get involved in this. This is a short war. I remember this very vividly as a kid. Basically, the nation of Iraq invades the tiny country of Kuwait. They want more coastline for oil and shipping, and Kuwait had a lot of oil too. The U.S. and a bunch of other nations step in and say, nope, you can't do that. And we actually push the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and it's considered a major success. This is where the first time the United States kind of hears a lot about Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Iraq. Your lifetime will see us go back to Iraq again, which we'll get to in a minute. And Saddam Hussein is no longer alive, right? If you remember, he was executed. We also have Operation Enduring Freedom. This deals with Afghanistan. After the 9/11 attacks, we find out Al-Qaeda, the people responsible for the attacks, are based in Afghanistan. That's where their terrorist training facilities are. That's where a lot of these organizers of the attack lived. George W. Bush starts this. Obama continues it. We're basically, it's really a war on terrorism. We're not fighting against Afghanistan. We're fighting against the terrorists that are in Afghanistan, trying to find them, trying to get rid of them, root them out, capture them, destroy the terrorist facilities. Eventually, we do kill Osama bin Laden, who's the one who organized and was responsible for 9/11. This war, technically, Operation Enduring Freedom is over, but there's another operation, and there's still soldiers in Afghanistan today. In fact, a friend of mine's just got back from a year of service in Afghanistan. He got back this summer. He was gone for a whole year from his family of 5 kids. So if you can imagine that, his youngest was basically just born when he left, so he didn't really know his youngest child for about a year of his child's life, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? So we would be naive to think that we're not involved in anything anymore. We still have soldiers in Iraq. We still have soldiers in Afghanistan. Do you know that we have naval or air or military bases in I don't know, I can't remember the number, but there's a lot of different places that our military is located around this world in different countries. So the bottom line is we're still involved in a lot here. And the last one is Operation Iraqi Freedom. Again, this is now we go back to Iraq again. George W. Bush claims there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We have a kind of a finished agenda there with Saddam Hussein. We want to really bring democracy to Iraq. We do say that there's also some terrorists there. Eventually we go in. We don't find any weapons of mass destruction, by the way. We had bad intel. Our intelligence does not turn out to have actual good intelligence. But we end up with this long war in Iraq. We still have soldiers there. My brother and a couple of my family members work for Oshkosh Corporation in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, that build a lot of the armored vehicles that they use in Iraq and Afghanistan that really save a lot of soldiers' lives from IEDs and big explosions and things. But yeah, so we go to Iraq. We do end up capturing and executing the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein. He had done a bunch of bad things to the Kurdish people, a minority group, used chemical warfare on them, which is really horrible. And so there's Operation Iraqi Freedom. So just a quick, nitty-gritty, big overview of all these things the United States have stepped into over the course of the 20th century and got involved in, whether it was for national security reasons, whether it was for territory reasons, to make money, lots of different things. Maybe it's all of them, but we got involved in a lot of things. Okay, I'd like you for the last 10 minutes to at least pull out BOMB, see where you're at, refresh yourself, get back into a little bit of a rhythm, and then you will be dismissed. But remember, for Wednesday, I want you to bring BOMB. You will be reading, you will be preparing for discussion a week from today. At least get out BOMB, or again, grab the audio, listen to some BOMB for the next 10 minutes, and then you're out of here.
Can I see that?